Good morning passengers, welcome to Martel Air. My name's Amanda and I'll be your pilot for today. We're just beginning boarding for flight number 6 from Albury to Mount Beauty, so grab your seats while I finish up the last steps of the pre-flight inspections of this Cessna Grand Caravan, the pride of the Martel Air fleet. Before engine start checklist. Pre-flight inspections complete. Parking brake set. Ignition switch normal. Fuel tank selectors both on. Bleed air heat switch off. Power lever idle. Prop RPM max. Fuel condition cut off. Fuel shut-off knob on. Battery switch on. Cabin lights on. Cockpit lighting set. Wing flaps up. No smoking lights on. Before engine start checklist complete. The weather today is hot and sunny and we'll be cruising at an altitude of about 10,000 feet, flying over Mount Kosciuszko en route. Your cabin crew today is me, and your emergency exits are located to the back of the cabin where you entered the plane. I also have a door up here by me, and if you see me leave, please follow me quickly. Our in-flight catering services are provided by our wonderful passengers, so I hope you pack something interesting. Engine start checklist. Battery switch on. Beacon lights on. Avionics 1 on. Bus volts check. Emergency power lever normal. Inertial separator handle bypass. EIS readings check. Propeller area clear. Fuel boost switch on. Fuel boost on, check. Fuel pressure low, not shown, check. Fuel flow 0, check. Starter switch on. Ignition on, check. Oil PSI, check. NG stable. Fuel condition lever low idle. Fuel flow check. NG climbing. NG stable. Starter switch off. Generator load check. Battery amps check. Fuel boost normal. Avionics 2 on. Nav lights on. Engine start checklist complete. We're now ready for departure, so please fasten your seatbelts and turn off your devices, apart from those used to watch this stream. Thank you for flying Martel Air. We hope you don't die. Before taxi checklist, taxi lights on, seatbelt light on, taxi clearance. Albury ground, Martel 06 with information Y, request taxi for takeoff for east departure. Taxiing, hold short runway 07, Martel 06. No such thing as being useful enough to actually give me real taxi instructions, but that's fine. So runway 06 will be that one just there. That's 07, yes. Ah, lovely, we're nice and close. Okay, taxi clearance check. Nav source check. Prop RPM to minimum. Fuel condition low idle. Inertial separator to bypass. Parking brake off. Before taxi checklist complete. And now we check behind us as best as we can. Okay. Now the wonderful thing about having all of these checklists is that even if you have ADHD, you don't forget things. And here we are, already at the runway. So we hold short. Before takeoff checklist, parking brake set, altimeter QNH set, standby flight instruments check, fuel boost switch normal, fuel tank selectors both on, fuel quantity check, fuel shut-off knob on, which is confusingly worded because the fuel shut-off knob being on means that the fuel is on, not that the fuel is shut off. Standby alt power on, anti-ice system, it's 24 degrees with a predicted high of 31, we do not need anti-ice. Inertial separator handle normal. Autopilot. Altitude set for cruise. Check. flight level change speed set to VY. Heading to a runway heading. Check. Heading mode. Bank mode for passengers. Autopilot setup complete. Wing flaps to takeoff position. Takeoff clearance. Albury Tower, Martel 06, ready at runway 07 for east departure. Clear off for cleared for takeoff runway 07, Martel 06. Takeoff clearance check. Strobe lights on. Landing lights on. Seatbelt light on. Parking brake release. Fuel condition high idle. Prop RPM to maximum. Before takeoff checklist complete. One last check to make sure that ATC is not going to kill us. And begin takeoff procedures. Flap set for takeoff. Gently advance the power. Rotate. Maintain 83 knots until obstacle clearance. Albury Tower, Martel 06, clear. Continue for east departure, roger. Flaps up. Engage autopilot. And once we are clear of the obstacles, we can turn towards Mount Kosciuszko. So this is the first time streaming onto YouTube instead of onto Twitch, just because we've had so many people having trouble getting into the Twitch chat. I thought it would be more fun to try this instead. And since I'm not culturally very Twitch, I am not, as the youth say or used to say, very poggers. So it's interesting looking at the delay in the YouTube chat output. I think I'm on the settings for highest quality rather than for highest responsiveness, so that may be something to try one step down next stream. But now we are climbing out of Albury in nice smooth air. Albury Tower, Martel 06, frequency change to 125.2. Melbourne Centre, Martel 06 is type Cessna Caravan, 5 miles east of Albury, 12,400 feet, requests clearance to transition Charlie airspace. Squawk 0564, Martel 06. Cleared through the Charlie airspace, Martel 06. The joys of actually flying out of a tower-controlled airport with controlled airspace around it, where usually, the last few streams, we've been flying out of tiny places that have traffic channels. In fact, we're flying into a tiny airport that I don't know if I'll actually call it an airport for the end of this flight. But that is something for a little later. So usually I'd be flying at about 8,000 feet because that's where this plane is most comfortable, but this flight is going to be at 10,000 feet because we are flying directly towards Mount Kosciuszko, the tallest mountain in Australia, which is 7,500 feet more or less. And now we leave a small pause while everybody who's not from Australia is either broken with laughter or bafflement at the thought of a 2,228 metre hill being called a mountain. Cruise climb checklist. Anti-ice system not required. Inertial separator handle normal. Airspeed VY check. Prop RPM set. Power lever set for climb. ITT range within safe parameters. Landing lights staying on for the moment. Now, one thing I've found flying over these mountains is that we can get some rather interesting weather popping up quite suddenly. I had one where in this plane I was taking 50-knot crosswinds. I did not crash the plane. It tried to. So I think for this flight we'll be keeping the seatbelt light on, just in case. Passing through 8,000 feet, landing lights off. Now there is one more addition to the Martel Air team that I would like to introduce to everybody. I've been playing around with some modifications in Flight Sim to add a copilot in without adding in. So a problem with this aircraft is that if you add in, well, a problem with all of Microsoft Flight Sim is that if you add in the pilot and copilot avatars while you're inside the plane, your camera will be inside the pilot's head. Makes it rather hard to see anything and ridiculously unrealistic. But I've made it so that I can have a copilot and not have the pilot mesh showing where I would be sitting. But I do have them both visible from outside, as you might have seen at the start of the stream, when we were sitting on the ground looking in from outside. So, I would like to introduce you to my co-pilot, Wing Commander Lamington, Pavlova, Vegemite, Skymaster, Martel. Clearly, the goodest boy. The mod which allows these kinds of pilot and co-pilot skins has 6 different cats and 21 different dogs, and I decided that Wing Commander Lamington here would be the perfect addition to the crew. So, if anything goes wrong and I suddenly have a heart attack at the controls, please be assured that Wing Commander Lamington is fully qualified at crashing you all to your deaths. Flying the plane, possibly not, we'll see. I'm thinking Lamington as the short name, but I think Wing Commander Lamington as the medium short name. I am one of those people who is more delighted than is sensible by the notion of animals with ridiculously long names. Thus, Wing Commander Lamington, Pavlova, Vegemite, Skymaster, Martel. And when I get the thumbnail screenshot for this flight, it is definitely going to need to include the Wing Commander here. So, some of our previous flights have been over the flat bit with crinkly bits and the flat bit with flat bits. Today's flight is going to largely be over the crinkly bit with crinkly bits. Australia does in fact have varied terrain. Most of it in the southeast where we are is still covered in eucalypt forests, which are extremely flammable. So, you know, we'll not crash and start something, given that it is late summer right now. But a late summer of not been too much fire. There's just been storms and floods instead. Okay. Cruise checklist. Seatbelt lights remaining on. Anti-ice not required. Inertial separator normal. Prop RPM set. Power lever set. Fuel balance check. ITT range check. A little bit less power. Cruise checklist complete. And yes, eucalyptus trees are indeed explosive. We can have bushfires that travel at twice the speed of the wind, which is not how forest fires usually work. But when you consider that eucalyptus oil is a flammable oil and eucalyptus trees are absolutely soaked in it, especially the leaves, it gets interesting. I was not expecting to be rambling about bushfire physics in this stream, but this is how things usually go around here. And I have my document full of all the notes I'll need for this flight, and more specifically for the rambling during this flight. So just looking at the YouTube controls for this, which is a new thing for me. Looks like we've got 4 people in the cabin at the moment, which is nice. There is this whole new window full of many stats and many other things that is surely going to distract me and kill us all while we're flying. And, ooh, an expat Californian dealing with explosive eucalyptus trees. I recall the time that California tried to sue Australia over all of our eucalyptus trees that we'd sold there. It didn't go well. Yeah, it turns out if you import a bunch of trees without checking if they're made out of one of the more flammable oils that you can harvest without going to fossils, they burn a bit. Of course, these days how it actually works is that a lot of Australian firefighters spend their winters in California, and a lot of California firefighters spend their winters in Australia, because when you've got opposite bushfire seasons, the teamwork just makes sense. And Australian rural firefighters are particularly well trained in dealing with the ways you have to deal with eucalypt fires, like not trying to stop every bit of fire in every spot. Like, if there's a valley with nothing but more eucalyptus trees in it, make a fire break on the next ridgeline. Don't try and save the valley that's just got explosive trees in it. Just and since we're onto eucalyptus trees and me info dumping, well, we're always onto me info dumping and rambling. That's what you're here for. And, you know, cool pilot roleplay. Well, pilot roleplay anyway. The Australian, let's call it a folklore creature, the drop bear, is actually an educational device built around the way that eucalyptus trees work. So, most trees, when it comes time to drop something, will drop leaves. Certain eucalyptus trees, with very little warning, will drop branches. And I don't mean twigs. I mean branches that weigh 100 kilos. When we say don't camp under that tree, it's got drop bears in it, we actually mean that it's a widowmaker gum, and if you camp under it, it might drop a 100 kilo branch onto your tent and kill you. And I will note that widowmaker gum is not a particular species, it's just once they get over a certain size, and it's, as has been mentioned in the chat, when less things grow under the eucalyptus tree, it makes for a really tempting spot to put your tent when you're hiking, because there's nothing else there to get in the way. Yeah, you might not be waking up if you do that, but that's hard to get people to remember. Drop bears, really freaking memorable. Don't camp under widowmaker gums. And as we get towards the central part of the mountains that includes Mount Kosciuszko, you might be wondering where the mountain is. It's in fact fairly difficult to spot. Early maps of the area, in fact, mislabeled. So I'm looking at the chat, and I think there's like a 30-second to 1 minute delay. I think I might need to switch from current settings, which are normal latency, and next time I will try low latency, because I'd like to be able to chat to people. But when there's a 30-second delay and I can't see a transcript of my ramblings that people are responding to, it's being a bit of a challenge. It's fun. I was in the middle of a tangent. Mapping. Trying to map these mountains. So, when Strzelecki came through here, Pavel Strzelecki, a Polish explorer of Australia in the 19th century, the tallest mountain got labelled Mount Kosciuszko. But wait, which exact peak is that? There's a few here right next to each other. So, for the curious, Mount Kosciuszko is named for Tadeusz Kosciuszko. Yes, that is the Polish pronunciation, Kosciuszko. Polish people really don't like Australians naming our tallest mountain Kosciuszko, because we say it as Australianly as possible. But, so, Tadeusz Kosciuszko was a freedom fighter of the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth when both Russia and Prussia, aka North Germany, were invading. And he also had a brief sideline starting in 1776 when he went over to fight in North America, because there was more freedom fighting to be done and he was into that. So he went over and fought on the American side in the US Revolution, which gets fun. He just really liked freedom fighting, so he kept doing it. Oh yes, Kosciuszko sounds very Australian. Kosciuszko is the actual Polish pronunciation. In Polish you get all of these SZ and CZ clusters, and also SC, which is slightly different. But essentially, if you see a Polish name and it has SZ, that is a sh sound. And if it's got CZ, then it's a ch sound. And you also get names with SZCZ as a consonant cluster, which is quite a thing to see, and it is a sh sound, which yes does sound a bit like cocking a cartoon shotgun, but think of the way I usually see it explained is the consonant cluster in the middle of fresh cheese. Cheese. I do not have any cheese. Now I want cheese. Lamington, did you bring any cheese? No, you ate the cheese, didn't you? I blame you for my lack of cheese. You and your floppy tongue have consumed all of the cheese on this plane. You guys bring any cheese? Cheese? No cheese? At some point I'll work out how to add passenger avatars as well, but Flight Sim usually only does that for the people who are flying airliners. But we can see ahead of us here, one of these peaks is Mount Kosciuszko. It's the one, in fact, directly in front of us, and the summit is... The way I'm going to find the summit is that I've marked it on my nav map as the waypoint. The waypoint is the exact summit. And I've also been looking on maps and satellite photography, and I know how to spot the summit from the air, which is harder than you'd think it should be, because, as mentioned before, we don't really have much in the way of mountain. But the safety method I will be activating is switching that into relative terrain mode, because to make the flight more interesting, we will now be descending down. Luckily we are in VFR rules, so what my altitude is in fact my business. And we can just have a nice gentle descent down towards Mount Kosciuszko. Dogs, in fact, often are lactose intolerant, but one of the things about cheese is that the chemical processes involved in making hard cheeses and the somewhat fermented cheeses involves essentially the lactose being eaten by bacteria and chemical processes. It's weird. So, you know, it depends on what part of the milk/cheese you're actually allergic to. Some people are allergic to weird little proteins that nothing will remove. And just here you can see why I've switched the map to the terrain map to relative mode, because that green patch there is the stuff within 2,000 feet of our altitude. And I will in fact be switching to manual flying as we get a bit closer, just so that I can show things properly. And the yellow patches there are the bits within 1,000 feet. If it goes red, it's within 100 feet of our altitude, and we need to not go at it. And yes, as to the dogs eating anything, most dogs that I've seen that absolutely love cheese, they will just kill you with farts if they get enough cheese. So, VFR, Visual Flight Rules. That is a thing where you are expected to maintain your own navigation, your own obstacle clearance, because you are flying visually. You are flying by looking out of the aircraft. I'm now not sure if it's Visual Flight Rules or Visual Flight Rating. Oh, VFR? Oh no, I can fly in clouds. I can fly in... the rules and classifications and all of these wonderful things get interesting and complicated and vary by country. But so Visual Flight Rules are where you are handling your own navigation, your own altitude, all this sort of stuff. So one of the things is, so we have these different classifications of airspace that we fly through. Yeah, so the ratings are restrictions on a pilot license depending on how much you're trained for. You can be VFR rated and IFR rated and all this sort of stuff, and Cat 3 rated, Cat 1 rated. There's so many rules and they vary between countries. So you will have noticed before one of the ATC calls that I had to do, which I really hope the voice mod was working this time. I had to request permission to transition Charlie airspace, which is Class C airspace, which is controlled airspace where they will say where you can and can't go, or you know that you get permission to fly through there. They are tracking you on radar, so they know that you're not going to fly into somebody else. All this sort of stuff. It's you know, useful. It happens around bigger airports, bigger cities, that sort of thing. Australia does not have Class B airspace. And there is also Class A airspace, and in Australia that tends to be essentially the airspace above a certain altitude. I think it's 18,000 feet, where if you're flying VFR, you're just not allowed above that altitude. You're not allowed into Class A airspace, because Class A airspace, or Alpha airspace, as it would be called, is for... like, that's where the airliners fly. Now, this thing basically can't take you into Alpha airspace altitudes anyway, because so airliners tend to pressurize their cabins to 8,000 feet, which is about where we are at the moment, a little bit below. This plane does not have a pressurization system. We in fact just pull air in and breathe it. So we can't go extra high because everybody inside will have an accidental nap. We don't want the accidental nap. So, this unassuming hill section is Mount Kosciuszko. You're shocked, I can tell. Okay, pressurizing a plane to below sea level is slightly terrifying. Now, the ATC stuff gets interesting here because we're actually right on, like, Mount Kosciuszko is basically the border between two zones. So if we're doing everything perfectly correctly, I'd be changing frequencies like 3 times in the next minute. We won't be doing that. But yeah, this stuff just here, bringing it off autopilot so I may get a little less good at chatting. This is the peak of Mount Kosciuszko. We are a bit low, but this is an adventurous little tourist flight. Now you can see just through to our left here, there is a bit of a peak, and there's a path that is cycling up to, there's a almost circular path that looks like it's going around this little pointy bit. That is the highest point in mainland Australia. That path stops at the summit, and there's, you know, a little rock cairn there, all this sort of stuff. I see your peak in a fit of pique pun, and I acknowledge it for being as awful as it is, and I applaud you. Now, one thing that you might be noticing here that will be fascinating to people from places where there are actually mountains is that it's green. Look at all of this green. So one of the things that mountaineering types do is that they have this list of the Big 7, the tallest mountain on every continent. I have been to the top of one of the Big 7 on a school trip. So a lot of copies of the list of the Big 7 will in fact amend the Australia to actually say Australasia, and they'll point you at something in Indonesia that's about twice as high. So just circling around to see that summit again, this time letting the people on the right side of the plane see it, and also looking out past Wing Commander Lamington to get a good screenshot for the thumbnail, because, you know, we're acting like I'm a serious streamer. Oh, I need his head a little bit higher in the frame so he's not behind the text that gets overlaid onto the thumbnail. And I am actually paying attention to where we're going. I just happen to be looking at Wing Commander Lamington's flight instruments, not my own. There we go. Lovely shot there. And there's the summit. So yes, our tallest mountain is not so tall that it has a permanent snow cap. What happens with normal tall mountains is that once they go over a certain height, you get the permanent snow cap. There is always white bits on top of the mountain. Think of your cartoon mountain, think of Mount Fuji. There's white on it year round because it's high enough that it gets cold enough. So we are flying here just above Australia's tallest mountain. And the air temperature outside our plane is still 9 degrees. That's ridiculous. And you can see there's all these lovely paths through here. There is in fact a ski lift that gets you most of the way to the top, which is how we got there on the school trip. They've installed public toilets at the top. And the path that you can see that spirals up to the summit is a boardwalk that's installed so that people don't trample the native vegetation that's up here. And there's a bit of a thing of feral horses that live in this sort of area, and they like to trample all of the green bits. But yeah, our tallest mountain, not tall enough for a permanent snow cap. You're toasty and warm, aren't you, Wing Commander Lamington? The white bit in front there might be camera glitch from what time of year the Microsoft Bing Maps cameras took their pictures. But yeah, so that's Mount Kosciuszko, Australia's tallest peak. So for some comparison, I looked up places that are about the same altitude that 7,300 feet is the top of Mount Kosciuszko. At about 7,500, so about 100 feet below where I am in the plane, or where we are, would be ground level in Mexico City with 9 million people. If this was Mexico City at this altitude, we'd be hitting houses. That's just how low Mount Kosciuszko is. So, getting us back onto the autopilot. And I think I'll take us back to 10,000 feet, because that is a nice altitude for these mountains. If we get ridiculous weather hitting us suddenly, I'd rather be at 10,000 than 7,000. And yes, hoodie weather while flying above the tallest mountain. It's great. Now the plane is heated. The joyful thing about this big spinning turbine in front of us is that the inside of that is 620 degrees. So we get to stay toasty. And there we are, back on the nav course. Now, I believe I've promised people some the usual in-flight entertainment, which I've been introducing, which is some poetry reading, and we're starting with Banjo Paterson stuff because that's, you know, good, classy Australian stuff. So this flight will be doing The Man from Snowy River, because it's talking about somebody who is from the sides of Mount Kosciuszko. Now, I will note that this poem is from 1890 and talks about horse riding, so there is mention of the use of spurs and, you know, blood from the use of spurs when riding hard. Just in case anybody would like to mute my ramblings for the next couple of minutes as I read Man from Snowy River. Do we have deeper valleys then? Not really. To have deeper valleys, you need up to go down from. We mostly just have flat. We have some very pretty valleys and gorges. Gorgeous, gorgeous. Anyway, poetry. We're being classy. We're also checking that the plane is flying as it is meant to be before we get distracted by poetry. Like making sure that I've set it so that it's actually going to climb to that altitude I want from it. and not overstressing the engine as I tell it to climb. You see, this is why you get multiple pilots, and also why airliners have cabin crew who talk to the passengers instead of having the person flying and doing all of the checklists also entertain the passengers. But look, Wing Commander Lamington is handling the adorable side, and I'm handling everything else. Good job, buddy. There we are, back to 10,000 feet. And it looks like we've got about 21 minutes before we get to Mount Beauty and its fascinating approach procedures. I'm actually enjoying the challenge of having to do the rambling, the flying, and the poetry. This is an interesting mix. I'm just going to move the chat somewhere I can see it while I'm doing this. So, Man from Snowy River. This is one of the classics of Australian literature, basically. There was movement at the station. The word had passed around that the colt from Old Regret had got away and joined the wild bush horses. He was worth £1,000, so all the cracks had gathered to the fray. All the tried and noted riders from the stations near and far had mustered at the homestead overnight, for the bushmen love hard riding where the wild bush horses are, and the stock horse snuffs the battle with delight. There was Harrison, who made his pile when Pardon won the cup, the old man with his hair as white as snow, but few could ride beside him when his blood was fairly up. He would go wherever horse and man could go. And Clancy of the Overflow came down to lend a hand. No better horseman ever held the reins, for never horse could throw him while the saddle girths would stand. He learnt to ride while droving on the plains. And one was there, a stripling on a small and weedy beast. He was something like a racehorse undersized, with a touch of Timor pony, 3 parts thoroughbred at least, and such as are by mountain horsemen prized. He was hard and tough and wiry, just the sort that won't say die. There was courage in his quick, impatient tread, and he bore the badge of gameness in his bright and fiery eye, and the proud and lofty carriage of his head. But still, so slight and weedy, one would doubt his power to stay, and the old man said, "That horse will never do. For a long and tiring gallop, lad, you'd better stop away. Those hills are far too rough for such as you." So he waited, sad and wistful. Only Clancy stood his friend. "I think we ought to let him come," he said. "I'll warrant he'll be with us when he's wanted at the end, for both his horse and he are mountain bred. He hails from Snowy River up by Kosciuszko's side, where the hills are twice as steep and twice as rough, where are horses whose strike firelight from the flintstones every stride, and the man that holds his own is good enough. And the Snowy River riders on the mountains make their home, where the river runs those giant hills between. I have seen full many horsemen since I first commenced to roam, but nowhere yet such horsemen have I seen." So he went. They found the horses by the big mimosa clump. They raced away towards the mountain's brow, and the old man gave his orders, "Boys, go at them from the jump. No use to try for fancy riding now. And Clancy, you must wheel them. Try and wheel them to the right. Ride boldly, lad, and never fear the spills. For never yet was rider that could keep the mob in sight, if once they gained the shelter of those hills." So Clancy rode to wheel them. He was racing on the wing, where the best and boldest riders take their place. And he raced his stock horse past them, and he made the rangers ring with the stock whip as he met them face to face. Then they halted for a moment while he swung the dreaded lash, but they saw their well-beloved mountain full in view, and they charged beneath the stock whip with a sharp and sudden dash, and off into the mountain scrub they flew. Then fast the horsemen followed, where the gorges deep and black resound to thunder of their tread, and the stock whips woke the echoes, and they fiercely answered back from cliffs and crags that beetled overhead. And upward, ever upward, the wild horses held their way, where mountain ash and Kurrajong grew wide. And the old man muttered fiercely, "We may bid the mob good day, no man can hold them down the other side." When they reached the mountain summit, even Clancy took a pull. It might well make the boulders hold their breath. The wild-top scrub grew thickly, and the hidden ground was full of wombat holes, and any slip was death. But the man from Snowy River let the pony have his head, and he swung his stock whip round and gave a cheer, and he raced him down the mountain like a torrent down its bed, while the others stood and watched in very fear. He sent the flintstones flying, but the pony kept his feet. He cleared the fallen timber in his stride. And the man from Snowy River never shifted in his seat. It was grand to see that mountain horseman ride. Through the stringy barks and saplings on the rough and broken ground, down the hillside at a racing pace he went, and he never drew the bridle till he landed safe and sound at the bottom of that terrible descent. He was right among the horses as they climbed the further hill, and the watchers on the mountain standing mute saw him ply the stock whip fiercely. He was right among them still, as he raced across the clearing in pursuit. Then they lost him for a moment, where two mountain gullies met in the ranges, but a final glimpse reveals, on a dim and distant hillside, the wild horses racing yet, with the man from Snowy River at their heels. And he ran them single-handed till their sides were white with foam. He followed like a bloodhound on their track, till they halted cowed and beaten. Then he turned their heads for home, and alone and unassisted brought them back. But his hardy mountain pony, he could scarcely raise a trot. He was blood from hip to shoulder from the spur. But his pluck was still undaunted, and his courage fiery hot, for never yet was mountain horse a cur. And down by Kosciuszko, where the pine-clad ridges raise their torn and rugged battlements on high, where the air is clear as crystal and the white stars fairly blaze at midnight in the cold and frosty sky, and where around the overflow the reed beds sweep away to the breezes and the rolling plains are wide, the man from Snowy River is a household word today, and the stockmen tell the story of his ride. There we go. Long poem with a few stumbles in there, but... So, anybody who is here from the Hands of the Emperor / Victoria Scribbins, Victoria Goddard Discord might notice some Gemmus Greenwing energy in the man from Snowy River, and the other Gemmus energy in his horse, which I had not realised until I was pre-reading the poem in preparation for the stream, but it absolutely delights me. And getting a bit more practice at reading things, I mean, one, in that sort of cadence, and two, you know, actually reading things confidently is, you know, quite an enjoyable thing that I'm finding from this. And we are about 10 minutes from Mount Beauty, which means we are more than 10 minutes from landing, because we have this fascinating little approach procedure. So in that bit in front of us where you can see mountains, there's an airport in there. But as mentioned before, I don't think I'm going to call it an airport, really. Aerodrome, perhaps? It's got a runway. The landing aids on this runway they've painted the runway numbers. The approach procedure, in fact, involves first overflying the airport at a relatively low altitude to check it for kangaroos, because you never know if they'll be standing on the runway. And you also have to check that it's not in use for glider or model aircraft use, which is actually one of the primary uses for Mount Beauty Aerodrome. I'm going to call it an aerodrome. They call it an airport. YMBT airport. It's an aerodrome. So it's not a rated airport, not a oh, I'm trying to remember the word for it. I've just done a lot of words. Not a certified airport for any operations. The airport information page is truly a thing of beauty. Mount Beauty, you might say. Yes, more puns. More puns. So, I'm just going to load up pilot information on the website. Or was it airport details? There we go, yes. Airport facilities. Public toilet. Shelter and tea/coffee for visiting pilots are available at terminal building. No fuel available. Nearest fuel is Albury, where we came from. That's the list of airport facilities. Public toilet, tea and coffee available if you're sheltering in the terminal building. Avoid overflying the township, except when conditions require approaching to land on runway 32. Never try to land on runway 32. So most airports will have which runway you use based on the weather, because you want to both land and take off into a headwind. A crosswind is bad and a tailwind is bad. At Mount Beauty, you take off from runway 32 and you land on runway 14, because there is a mountain just off the end of runway 14 that is about 1,000 feet high above the airport aerodrome, 1.5 nautical miles from the end of the runway. That is terrifying and dreadful. So the standard descent pass takes you down at an angle of 3 degrees. To clear this mountain, you would have to land on runway... to clear this mountain and land on runway 32, you would have to maintain more than 12 degrees. In fact, one of the main pictures of the aerodrome is a lovely aerial shot of Mount Beauty Aerodrome, looking down from the end of runway 32. And there's a note attached to this photo of the airport. Note, the trees in the bottom right of the main airfield photo. This was taken from the ground, not the air. Which bit are you questioning if it actually says that? Sorry, with the lag that I will be dealing with for the next stream. And you can just see in the distance there's this little flat valley area. This is the valley that we are flying to. So that is the Kiowa Valley, which the Kiowa River runs along. And the other end of this valley, which is fairly straight, it's a fairly straight valley. You can see it going between the mountains off down there. We'll get a better view of it as we're flying away from the aerodrome after overflying it. So, you know, to quote the pilot information for this airport, straight-in approaches are not recommended. Overfly the airfield to check for aircraft/gliding activity and animals, kangaroos/cows on the strip. And yes, on which one to take off from, which one to land on. This one is in red text. We strongly recommend that you do not take off on runway 14 unless you have suitable aircraft performance and weather. The runway slopes upward, and the hill at the end of runway 14 is 1,000 feet above and only 1,500 meters away. So we're just getting in towards the runway or in towards the aerodrome for our kangaroos, cows, gliders overflight. Beauty traffic, Martel 06 is 6 miles east at 7,000 feet. Inbound for overflight before landing, runway 14. So, now we start to set up for how the landing will actually work. So yes, this is a small country town aerodrome, airport. Its primary purpose is gliders and other hobbyist things. You can just see it there to the right of the lake. They've written YMBT in nice big letters. I need to not descend too quickly because this thing will pick up speed. But yeah, so there's the airport that we're coming into. They've written the name of the airport and they've written the runway numbers. And there's the mountain directly off the end of the runway. That is why you don't come in for runway 32. This whole concoction here. And that is the Mount Beauty Township itself, which we are not overflying too much. But there is not much clearance between the two. Now we can see a couple of planes parked there. So you'll get a much better view of that mountain as we're coming into land. But from what I can see... Oh, and you can also see the displaced threshold where there's just extra space not used. but that looks clear of kangaroos to me. So just getting us set back on autopilot for doing the approach. Give us flight level change of 110. Lovely. Now you can see in front of us, this is the Kiewa Valley with the Kiewa River running down it. And the other end of this valley is Albury Wodonga. The Kiewa River joins the River Murray on the Wodonga side of Lake Hume, which is the lake just to the east of Albury, which is, the lake is also part of the river as far as border calculations are concerned. I swear, these streams are the most I talk in a week. But, you know, talking more is probably good for me, as is eventually listening to my own voice at least once or twice. So, you can see, actually, the map will show this beautifully. You can see here that we have, so, red is within 100 feet of our altitude, yellow is within 1,000, green is within 2,000. You can see that there's this nice, relatively straight valley that leads us straight to Mount Beauty, which is at the end of the valley. So they have, of course, lined the runway up more or less with that valley, because that's the only way you can approach it. And yeah, as you can see, within 100 feet of our altitude also means above. We're at about 3,300, climbing up to 4,000 for when we start the approach. So I've loaded up the approach procedure or routing on the map, which is what this white line is. There we go. You can see it without my face in the way. Isn't it great? So we fly out and then come back in along that valley. I'm going to take us out this way. That will be lovely. And some more fun views of Wing Commander Lamington. I'm so happy that I worked out how to do that. That's just such a fun little addition. Anyway, this is what mountains should look like, not that technically tall but a bit worn down flatness that is Kosciuszko. So the reason that Australian mountains are like that, by the way, is that Australia is some of the oldest continental crust in the world that hasn't been destroyed by erosion or subduction. So, for example, the Himalayas are the youngest mountain range in the world. A few million years ago, India broke off from Madagascar and started shooting north. Or more accurately, a large chunk broke off from Africa. Some of that broke off and stayed behind near Africa as Madagascar, with big cliffs all the way down the east coast. And the rest of it, with big cliffs all the way down the west coast, shot north as India and rammed into the Asian continent. So you have the crumple zone of this collision, that is the Himalayas, and you have the stuff behind the collision that's just been kind of shoved upwards, which is the Tibetan Plateau. And because those mountains are very new, they've not had time to get worn down to nothing yet. You get similar with comparing the different mountain ranges in the Americas, like I think it's the Appalachians, which are actually part of the same mountain range originally, that is the Scottish Highlands and the Scandinavian mountains, that have been worn down quite a bit because they are older than the evolution of bones. And then you get the Rockies, which are much newer and thus pointier. And so Australia, having a 3 to 4 billion year old crust in some sections, has just had so much time to get worn down, and because we're the middle of a tectonic plate, we've had extra time to get stuff worn down without time to get more stuff put on. So, you know, we have a good reason for it being so weird and flat. Okay. Lovely. Attention passengers, we're now approaching Mount Beauty, and I've kept the seatbelt sign switched on, which means I'd like you to keep your seatbelts fastened. Enjoy this riddle and more as we come in towards landing, and thank you again for flying Martel Air. We hope you don't die. Approach checklist. Seatbelt lights on. Anti-ice system not required. Fuel tank selectors both on. Fuel condition high idle. Prop RPM max. Flaps to approach position. Watching the mountains. Landing lights on. Inertial separator bypass. Brakes off. And here we see why I made sure to climb to 4,000 feet while doing this approach, because yeah, it's not entirely clear along the approach path because they couldn't line it up perfectly with the valley because of terrain, the lake at the end of the runway, all this sort of thing. But yes, the pilot information for Mount Beauty says current status, animal hazard, kangaroos, deer, birds. And here we are coming onto the approach path. So can't quite see it out in front of us just yet because we're still a bit out. We are 11 nautical miles from Mount Beauty. Nice long approach. Make sure that we're nice and stable. Get everything set up. So, as this aerodrome that I refuse to call an airport is so small, it doesn't have an actual ILS system, but we do have the GPS version, where the GPS will just look at the altitude and the altitude of the destination and calculate a 3 degree slope. So we have what is essentially an ILS approach. But, and we're just coming up from underneath. You're meant to capture glide slopes from underneath for fascinating technical reasons that mostly have to do with radio physics. But there we go. The pink dot to the right of the direction indicator is the position. Like, it's slightly confusing if you're not used to it. The pink dot will show if it's up we need to go up because the glide slope is above us. If it's low, we need to go low because the glide slope is below us, which is kind of backwards from what you might be used to with a lot of flight displays. Like with the attitude direction indicator in the middle, if it's pointing down, it's because I'm going down and need to point up. And yes, existential dread and delight from mountains is, I think, the correct response. Like, they're just ridiculous. And given that we are currently flying towards one and hoping to land just short of it, you might find some time in this. Just making sure that everybody knows where we are. Mount Beauty traffic, Martel 06, 8 miles northwest, 3,200 feet. Inbound to land on runway 14. So because there's so much glider and model aircraft activity on this airport, it gets interesting to look at how much I would need to be doing with the traffic channel just to make sure that, like, because there aren't any controllers and it's not really a very busy airport, you need to give people plenty of warning. And it is also quite a short runway and narrow as hell. If I was in anything bigger than this, this would be an interesting, difficult landing. As it is, this runway can be slightly tricky because you have, like, it's about a third the width of most other runways, and it's a bit short, and its lighting system is come during the day. Its pilot assistance is a website. There aren't even approach charts. It's great. And I'm thinking that for next stream, where we'll be taking off from Mount Beauty, we need to do it with the plane as heavily loaded with cargo as possible, because that will be fascinating. Getting off the ground in this valley, and now I can see the runway, which is lovely. Getting off the ground and flying out of this valley will be fascinating. Final approach checklist. Autopilot staying on for now. Seatbelt lights on. Flaps to landing position. Airspeed reduce to landing speeds. So yes, to get onto this runway, which I don't know if you can see it yet, because I can just see it because I'm on a 27-inch screen, full screen, for the flight sim window. And also I've landed at this airport, but it is in fact dead center of the screen, approaching as basically the one thing that's not moving. And oh, it is almost perfectly still wind, which is a rare treat for this airport. This one with crosswinds is spicy. Now manually flying. Speed at the bottom of the recommended range. Don't drift. And the other trick with this runway, because it's short and narrow, is hitting where you want to, not missing side to side, and not doing what we call floating, where you try not to land too hard and you struggle to put it down at all, and there's a fence right at the bottom of the runway. And touchdown. Brakes, reverse thrust, and there we go. That was one of my better landings at this aerodrome that I refuse to call an airport. Look, this place has a barn. And a crop duster. And if you look ahead of us, you can see why we don't take off in this direction. That mountain is right there. Don't fly this direction. Mount Beauty traffic, Martel 06 is clear of the runway. Now I think we are in fact on the opposite side of the runway to the terminal building, which, as noted previously, is where the tea and coffee facilities are, which is clearly important. I don't believe it's the barn. I think it might actually be that little brown building just opposite us. But... ooh. No, I did not tell you to go forward. Oh god, this is a slight hill as well, isn't it? Now, because it is such a small airstrip, I in fact did not have time for my checklists, which always gets interesting. The important thing is to turn off the landing lights and the strobe lights, because those blind people when you're not using them for safety reasons. But you put them on before you enter the runway and turn them off after you leave the runway, because that's how other planes see you from a distance. Every time there's an on-runway collision, they reinforce those rules. Okay, there's no taxi clearances need. We've got the taxi lights on. The inertial separator handle is definitely needed at this aerodrome with its grass parking. Prop RPM, medium, low idle. That's why it was creeping forward when I didn't tell it to. I hadn't switched from flight idle to ground idle. And now there's the parking to do. Attention passengers, we've landed safely in Mount Beauty and the local time is 1:31 PM. Please remain seated until the plane comes to a complete stop at whatever ridiculous parking spot I work out for us. And remember that queuing for the exit in an 8-seater makes you look even more ridiculous than normal. There we go. Reversing into the parking, because we fly. Oop. That tried to get away from me. What are you doing, plane? Yes, the ability to reverse the plane is so useful for parking in ridiculous places like this. Shutdown checklist. Parking brake handle set. Power lever idle. Bleed air heat switch off. ITT range stable. Prop RPM feather. Fuel condition lever cut off. Inertial separator handle to normal. Attention passengers, this now concludes our flight from Albury to Mount Beauty via Mount Kosciuszko, and we here at Martel Air hope you've enjoyed your time in our tiny sky bus. Please wait until I've opened the door and you can calmly deplane in an orderly fashion. Our baggage handling services today will be provided by our wonderful passengers, so thank you for not leaving any of your luggage behind. Any personal belongings left behind as you leave the plane will be assumed to be a present to the pilot and copilot and enjoyed thoroughly. Thank you for flying Martel Air. We hope you don't die. Lights off. Fuel boost off. NG check. Temperature ambient. Avionics 2 off. Avionics 1 off. Battery off. Fuel tank selectors both off. And here we are at Mount Beauty with the airplane nicely shut down. And we can have the joyful view there of my avatar along with a Wing Commander Lamington, Pavlova, Vegemite, Skymaster, Martel. And also enjoy the ridiculous livery I've put together, which we don't often get to see because I keep us inside the plane during flight, because any other option would be ridiculous. I do rather enjoy the livery I came up with. I was actually working on this before the stream even came up as an idea, just because I like playing with art programs. I especially like the... You usually have a national flag on the back of the plane. I went for showing my allegiances a bit of a different way. Just to, you know, plant a flag, as it were, no flag, no country, about what side of certain debates I'm on. And the fact that you can edit these liveries if you've got a reasonable level of access to and knowledge of certain video editing programs. I do rather like the Cessna Grand Caravan. It looks like it should be one of those tiny little single-engine Cessnas, and then you look at it compared to a normal single-engine plane, and you realise that, oh yeah, this thing has luxurious spaced-out seating for 8 passengers and 2 crew, plus cargo room in the back, plus the cargo pod underneath, and a turboprop engine instead of a piston engine. This thing's actually fairly sizable. The cargo pod underneath that I've painted in that lovely deeper burgundy colour has these, you can just see them, 4 hatches on the side for filling it with cargo. It's actually detachable if you open it up and undo a few bolts. The plane looks weird without it. It's weirdly flat. I'm not super into it being weirdly flat like that, and I like the idea of being able to carry that much cargo. So I think for the next stream, which may be next Saturday at a similar time, it may in fact be a midweek evening stream, depending on what else is on, and if people want to see, like, you know, if I possibly try and get a different time zone's worth of viewers. Of course, with live weather, that will mean if I do an evening stream, it will be another one, like, I think it was the 3rd stream, where we were in pitch black. If you look into the void to our right, you will not see Lake George. And if you look into the pitch black void to our left, you will not see Bungendore. It was more... Excuse you, Van. Rude. It was one of the more difficult to keep any content going. And yes, the size comparison just delights me. I have actually parked this next to the Cessna 172, which is like the classic iconic Cessna. And it just... I've also made a comparison... Oop, that should not open on that screen. I've also made a size comparison picture, which I'm just going to find now because it delights me with how ridiculous it is. Because I wanted to compare this thing. If I can remember what folder I put it in. My hard drive, I think the roots of my documents drive might reach to about 2005, because the documents drive was copied over from the 1 terabyte drive from the previous iteration of this computer, which started in 2009. But before that, the same drive was actually my external hard drive, which I got... Yeah, it will have been about 2005, 2006 that this documents drive really started. So, finding anything in it... No, I do not want the tentacle alignment chart. I do not want the sun in Pikachu. Not quite now, anyway. This is, I'm sure, riveting viewing. Me sitting outside the plane while hunting through my... Look, you know what? I'm going to make this a little nicer for everybody. There you go. There's Lamington. And I should probably check the chat while I'm doing that. So, I'm glad people enjoyed the stream. I am, in fact, going to find that file for the size comparison, possibly for the next stream. And, we've been going for an hour 40 now. That's more than I thought it was, but that was an hour of just flight, plus on the ground at each end, plus swirling around Mount Kosciuszko, plus overflying the aerodrome and then flying out again. I do like how much grass textures have evolved. Wow, the ADHD is strong today. It's my first day back on ADHD meds in quite a while, because I didn't get the script refilled because of the ADHD. And yeah, just when Commander Lamington, your tongue is just so floppy. Anyway, I'm going to stop having ADHD at all of you and end the stream there, unless anybody has any questions. I've just realised that if I say if anybody has any questions, that's leaving me at least a 30-second delay while I wait for the... I say it, then it processes through YouTube, then it comes to everybody else, then the typing. Oh well. I think if any of you had any questions, you would have asked by now. And I will see, hopefully, all of you for the next stream, whenever that ends up being.